Hello everyone, welcome to our session. I'm Chrsitine Yung Hung, a postdoc lecturer and researcher at the Department of Agricultural Economics. Our work is related to agro-food marketing and consumer behavior, and I will tell you more about that. In this presentation, we will look at how we use consumer research to contribute to nutrition and healthy aging for the community dwelling older adults. So why do we conduct consumer research? It is very important because we want to know what consumers really need and want and what are the factors that influence their decisions or choices, because their choices have large impacts on health and sustainability for the environment, economy, or the society as a whole. And there are different applications for consumer research. Using these insights, we can generate public policy recommendations for the government, or we can come up with strategies for marketing or new product developments for the industry to help it to achieve success. Or we will be able to give guidelines or give suggestions to health professionals when it comes to dietary and lifestyle recommendations, where we will be able to have a good match between consumer preferences and the guidelines so that they will keep sticking with them. And in our research group, agro-food marketing and consumer behavior, these are the areas of our scientific disciplines or research. As the name suggested, we do consumer and behavioral research based on scientific methods. We also do market and marketing research and give recommendations based on the evidence for the market and the target, and to see what communication could be optimum. Then we also study acceptance of consumers when it comes to food product innovation. It can be the technology or it can be the product itself. Then we also look at how they perceive the different risk and how we can best communicate to them with regard to the risk. We also sometimes use experimental economics. It can be both hypothetical through surveys or non-hypothetical, like experimental options with real money and with tasting and sensory evaluation and analysis. We also work on health promotion and education and recommendations for public health nutrition policies. Then moving to the industry level, we also work on food chain traceability and integrity and to generate recommendations for industry competitiveness. Here I will use the European project Promise as an example to show you some of our work in relation to some of these disciplines that you have seen here. The Promise project stands for Prevention of Malnutrition in Senior Subjects in the EU. It's an interdisciplinary project that look at dietary features and the clinical outcomes, also physical activities, and oral and gut microbiome, then sustainable strategies, short-term and long-term effectiveness and feasibility, and we also develop new products and concepts. Here at UGent, we work on consumer behavior, so we look at the attitudes and preferences of older adults. And these are the different project partners that we work together with. The overall objectives of our work were to quantify attitudes and preferences of older adults. So we try to look at what they think and what they like with regard to dietary and physical activity characteristics. At the same time, we try to take into account their daily patterns or habits, because for older adults, it's very important. Then from there, we identify or derive recommendations for different strategies and new food product development, so that we will be able to have a potential match with their preferences and that they would and that it will be acceptable to them. All the studies that we have conducted have received ethics approval before the data collection. And here I will show you some highlights of the result. We have conducted 2 waves of data collections in 5 European countries, in Finland, Poland, the Netherlands, Spain, and the United Kingdom when they were still in the EU. I will show you one by one briefly. So the first part there, we modeled the different factors that may influence protein intake. If you think about your daily life, there are many factors that would influence what you eat, leave alone the protein intake. So there we had more than 80 variables. Therefore, I used machine learning to make sure that we select a model that performed the best and to use that model to identify what predictors would be important in shaping protein intake. And just to briefly explain it, country was important, physical activity level, also then the gender, and whether they eat something during this mid-afternoon snack moment. So those were the most important predictors. Then using insights related to their appetite level or the risk of having protein malnutrition, we could also put them into groups. So in this strata, we will be able to identify their characteristics or how to profile them. Let's say we were able to see who are the ones who were able to move or walk for 5 minutes without difficulties or with difficulties. And for example, the older adults who have poor appetite seems to have a bigger proportion of them that have oral health related issues or chronic problems like that, diabetics. And from there, we will be able to identify what they need. Then the third part is related to their knowledge. I have a question for you. What do you think? Is it true that 1 meal per day with a good protein source is sufficient? I give you 2 seconds. In this study, we found that this is actually the most common misconception among the older adults. So many of them believe that 1 meal per day with a good protein source is sufficient, and that is not true, but the majority of them thought that was the case. So here it gives us some idea what kind of communication messages would be necessary to increase the awareness and to help them to achieve a better or a more optimum level of protein intake. So now the first 3 parts are more related to health needs, and then now we look at the parts that are more related to environmental sustainability. We will see if they're ready to accept alternative and potentially more sustainable protein sources. Those ones in the green box there are the alternative and potentially more sustainable protein sources, and we could see that the plant-based protein was the most accepted source compared to, let's say, single cell, insect, and in vitro. And all in all, they would still prefer meat, dairy, and seafood protein sources. From there, we wonder if we could come up with strategies to promote sustainable protein consumption. And one of the ways to achieve it is to understand the reasons why they like meat or why they like plant-based meat substitutes, and also put them in different groups like meat lover, meat restrainer, and meat avoider to see what are the reasons behind that. For example, they like meat a lot, maybe because they grew up eating meat and they like the taste. And for those who like plant-based meat substitute, maybe because they think that they are better for animal welfare and for the environment. And we also look at how they value products, because imagine if you develop a product, you want your consumers to be willing to pay for it. So here we try to look at the evaluation for protein-enriched burger based on the protein sources, carbon labeling, and price premium using discrete choice experiment. So those are questions that are quite simple, they're multiple choice, and they could choose the best alternative to them. So which one they want to choose, and they can also choose that they want neither of them. And indeed, most consumers prefer red meat and poultry burgers above plant-based burgers. Nevertheless, carbon labeling may be able or could stimulate more sustainable food choices for red meat. Then finally, if we move on to public interventions, they would only be successful if they are acceptable to the public. So we look at what older adults think about the different public interventions to promote healthy and sustainable eating. With some of the examples like taxation, subsidies, restriction, incentives, or labeling, then they could rate what are more acceptable to them and what not. And we found that the older adults are much more supportive for interventions to promote healthy eating compared to those to promote sustainable eating, regardless of the type of interventions. And we can also group them into different segments. Some of them are more environment oriented, some of them more health oriented, some of them are believer, and some of them more skeptical about them. If you're interested, you can have a look at our publications. Thanks to the great team that we have been really productive. The project is still ongoing, and after the 2 waves of data collection, we have already published 5 manuscripts and top-ranked journals, and many more are coming. Coming back to the slide about the different applications of consumer research. So now you have seen that there's so many different applications for different stakeholders and different purposes. So no matter which field or research domain you're from, consumer research can be helpful or useful to achieve different objectives. We have ample experience in European projects. Besides Promise that you have just seen, currently we are also working on Seafood Tomorrow, that stands for Nutritious, Safe, and Sustainable Seafood for Consumer of Tomorrow. And Be Good, giving beekeeper guidance by computational assisted decision making. And finally, ProFuture, proteins of the future that focus on boosting the production and use of microalgae protein-rich ingredients in food and feed. If you're interested to know more, you're more than welcome to contact us. Professor Wim Verbeeke is the head of our research unit, and here you can find our contact detail. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you. Goodbye.